So just briefly then, chimpanzee hunting. It's now clear that chimpanzees hunt vertebrate prey regularly. And whether you can see this down here, here's a chimpanzee, and it's about to consume a red colobus monkey, which of course is not looking particularly happy about that. They are very effective hunters. Okay, so this is behaviour that was first observed by Jane Goodall in Gombe, and has since been recorded at a number of other sites. And it's been estimated that in Gombe, chimpanzees are responsible for about 20% of the deaths of colobus monkeys. And just to put that in perspective, that's approximately the same sort of level of predation that lions inflict on some of the large quadrupeds on the savannah. So chimpanzees are pretty effective hunters. And they do it in a number of different ways. There are chimpanzee groups out in the Thai forest in the west of Africa that hunt cooperatively, and then there are others who hunt in a much more sort of uncoordinated fashion. So we have good evidence now that hunting is not unique to humans. It can't possibly be something that really drove human evolution. Chimp warfare, again observed remarkably, this series of observations, most of them were kicked off by Jane Goodall in her research at Gombe. And so she was the first person to observe warfare amongst chimpanzees in the 1970s, where she saw one community that she was studying basically obliterate a neighbouring community, or kill off the males in particular. It's now been seen at a series of other sites, Mahali, Kabali, Bodongo, and this site that I mentioned earlier of Thai. And it's pretty clear that intergroup violence is basically the norm in chimpanzees. It's also pretty clearly deliberate. They go out on patrol. So the groups of males will go out and patrol the edges of their territory, seemingly looking for other males from other groups to attack. And in line with that, they have very well defined home ranges, it's now clear, and are very strongly territorial. And also going on with it, they tend to avoid border areas. Okay, so there's now pretty good evidence that warfare is basically endemic to chimpanzees as well. Tool use. I'm sure most of you have heard at least some of this evidence about chimpanzees engaging in tool use in relation to termiting. So here we have a couple of examples of chimpanzees using twigs to extract termites from termite mounds. More remarkably, recently we have evidence for chimpanzees using a combination of a hammer and an anvil to crack open nuts. Okay, so here we have one chimpanzee using a fallen tree trunk as an anvil, and a stone hammer here to crack open probably a palm oil nut. And then these guys down here are using stones, both as the anvil and the hammer. And recently, a couple of years back, really interesting results have just been produced highlighting the fact that some chimpanzee populations actually use spears to hunt. So there's a population of chimpanzees in a site called Fongoli that have been found to use sharpened sticks to hunt bush babies. So they poke about inside the places where the bush babies are hiding. So we have really substantial evidence for tool use in chimpanzees now. And lastly, the culture data, I think now is pretty compelling. This observations that were consistent with the idea of culture in the sense of culture being sort of socially learned behaviour. First started to come out in the late 1970s, but people really started to take notice with the publication of this paper by Whiten et al. In 1999, where Andrew Whiten, who's a professor of psychology at the University of St Andrews, got together the heads of many of the main study sites of chimpanzees where they've had long-term studies going. And they basically set about comparing notes about the behaviours that they observed. And they found considerable variation in these behaviours. I don't know whether you can see here, but at the top we've got two chimpanzees engaging in termite fishing. And it turns out there are several different ways in which they engage in that. And similarly, as we just talked about, there are different forms or different combinations of tools used in the nut cracking activities they engage in. And there are a number of other behaviours. 60 actually were documented in this White et al. Paper that vary amongst these sites. And then White and et al. Basically went through this list of 60 traits, 60 behaviours, and applied these criteria that I've listed here to them. And sort of basically we're looking to see whether they could explain the variation amongst the different sites in terms of ecological factors. Okay? And what they found was there were 39 of these behaviours that were expressed by some groups but not by others, so they were varying amongst the groups, and that couldn't be explained readily by ecological differences. So they then argued that the corollary of that is probably that these behaviours represent sort of socially learned traditions, that they're basically cultural phenomena. These are things that some animals in certain groups picked up as a behaviour and is then passed on to other members of the group. And so you get this sort of patchwork of behavioural variation across Africa, across the range of the chimpanzees. I should, before we get too carried away with chimpanzees, they are phenomenally important in terms of sort of framing our understanding of human evolution. It's worth pointing out that they're not the only animals that use tools. So here's a fantastic photograph of an orangutan attempting to hunt fish with a spear, apparently. So this orangutan is in a rehabilitation centre in Borneo, and apparently had been observing humans on the other bank of the river fishing with spears, and obviously decided this was worth trying. It's not clear whether he was successful or not. But, and the other, in some ways, much more compelling, or at least startling, work on tool making comes from studies of crows, in particular New Caledonian crows. This is a photograph of Betty the crow. If I had a bit longer, I would show you a fantastic video of her actually making, this is a metal hook that she's made to actually extract. This pot has got a treat in it, okay? And it's inside a tube that's too long for her to get to with her beak. And after a bit of messing about with a straight piece of wire, she basically forms this piece of wire into a hook and then uses the hook to extract the pot with the treat. And if any of you are interested, I'll go, the Oxford Zoology Department website has a bunch of these videos of Betty and a number of other these crows doing the most amazing things with tool making. It's really quite startling, as I say. It's also worth pointing out that this isn't just a captive behaviour. There's now evidence from the wild. These are tools made by New Caledonian crows in the South Pacific, in the wild. Okay, so here are twig tools, and these are ones actually made from modifying feathers. Okay, so we've now got sort of plenty of evidence for tool use outside of not only the human group, but also outside of chimpanzees. And there's pretty good evidence in a number of other species for the existence of socially learned behaviour of culture. So we have a number of groups of songbirds where the songs seem to be learned socially. We have killer whale songs off the coast here have been studied, and the calls of killer whales seem to be socially transmitted. There's evidence for Japanese macaques learning a particular behaviour whereby they would wash provisioned food in seawater, probably because of the salt content, and that behaviour was passed amongst the group of macaques. And then there's also quite substantial variation in orangutan populations in terms of their behaviours that also appears to be cultural. So I think we can safely argue that the framework for human evolution, that the common ancestor of humans and chimpanzees at least, was a cultural animal.